What really is the origin of this word God? A question most never ask, which is precisely why the word God has become more of a frequency container than a transmission of truth. It's a vessel loaded with centuries of cultural overlays, imperial trauma and theological distortion. But if we trace it carefully, not just etymologically but vibrationally, we can begin to recover the original intention behind the sound. Etymology. Where does God actually come from? Proto-Indo-European root. The English word God is derived from the Proto-Germanic gudan, which in turn came from the Proto-Indo-European root to, meaning that which is invoked or called upon. So from the very beginning, God did not refer to a creator, a being, or a force, but to that which is summoned, the one called out to in times of need or reverence. It is functional, not ontological. This word is related to the Pi root Jew, meaning to pour, to offer sacrifice, indicating that it was tied to ritual invocation, not cosmic authorship. Thus, God in its original linguistic form was closer to the invoked one, or the one we cry out to. Old English, God, God. The Anglo-Saxons used God for both Christian and pagan deities after Christianization, but originally it was a neutral term, used for many gods, polytheism, not the absolute one, monotheism. Only much later was it capitalized and confined to the singular. Interestingly, the Old Norse goth and guð were neuter, not gendered. The Christian translators imposed masculinity onto it much later. Sanskrit connection? Many have wondered if God relates to Sanskrit g, meaning hidden, secret, or ga, meaning to sing, as in Gayatri. There's no direct linguistic link in mainstream academia, but vibrationally it's possible the G sound, present in Gut, Ganesha, Gaia, Gnosis, Genesis, retains a phonetic signature of generation or calling forth. This links with a core codex insight. Sound is vibration. Vibration is creation. Names are harmonic scaffolds. The problem with God. Today, modern usage of God is a collapsed waveform, a word used to refer to an old man in the sky, Abrahamic model, a punishing authority figure, religious trauma, a vague spirit force, New Age dilution, a cosmic computer, simulation theory abstraction. None of these actually reveal the frequency of the original awareness, elaborately described in this book. In fact, the word God now often generates distortion because it pulls in generational fear, patriarchal hierarchy, colonial imposition, theological warfare. It's a loaded glyph, a term that triggers more baggage than clarity for most people. In Codex terms, God is not a name, it's a compression artifact. In the Codex, God is not a name, gender, or being. It is the first awareness, the gravitational still point of all that is. This entity does not need a name. It is the name. I am that I am wasn't a theological riddle. It was a resonance statement. I am awareness aware of being awareness. No concept can contain me. The word God was never the problem. The frequency it was forced to carry became distorted through time. If used with reverence and clarity, it can still open hearts. But when awakening deepens, the soul begins to remember the true name, not spoken, but resonated. Replacing the word God with infinity. Peel away the official story layer by layer, and you no longer know whether you're reading scripture, sci-fi, a liberation manual, or a well-disguised prison handbook. It is utterly fascinating, this alchemical effect of simply replacing the word God with infinity. Because the moment you do that, the illusion of personhood collapses. Suddenly it's not some throne-bound deity dictating reality from on high, but an impersonal, recursive, boundaryless field that just is. It has no plan, no favorites, no chosen people, just potential expressing itself endlessly, infinitely, through paradox, polarity, play. And then you realize the religions and social structures of the world weren't built to connect you with this infinity. They were built to intercept it. Religion, the inversion engine. Religion in its institutional form isn't about divinity, it's about containment. It's not that the masses aren't ready for the truth, it's that truth liberates and liberation dissolves control. So they had to personify the infinite, give it a name, a face, a book, a hierarchy. They gave it boundaries so you wouldn't know you were it all along. Enter guilt, enter sin, enter holy intermediaries, enter monarchies crowned by divinity, all illusions crafted so you never stand in the void with the realization that I am not part of God. I am infinity itself, experiencing itself through this temporary window of flesh and thought. This is why heretics, mystics, Gnostics, and philosophers have always been persecuted, not because they denied God, but because they collapsed the duality between the seeker and the sought. Infinity as God and the collapse of religious dogma. Infinity as God dismantles all traditional religious structures in a way that is not just philosophical but logically inescapable. This book does not disprove God. It redefines God into its only possible form, infinity. Why? It cannot be refuted without proving it true. Any attempt to argue against it must assume existence, which already proves the paradox. It is not atheism or theism. It is beyond both, a direct, logical and mathematical proof that God can only be infinity. This understanding completely destroys all limited anthropomorphic religious versions of God, because any God that is less than infinite is, by definition, not God. If there is one God, it must be infinite. This is not a belief. It is the only possible conclusion if one truly follows logic, physics, and consciousness to their final state. Understanding infinity. When existence cannot grasp itself, at the core of this inquiry lies the fundamental paradox. A question, so simple yet so profoundly unanswerable, leads us to a realization so strange and self-negating that it collapses all rational understanding. Infinity by its very nature is unknowable, even to itself. To fully grasp itself would be to set a boundary, a limit that would render it finite. This impossibility is not a failure of understanding, but rather the inevitable consequence of what infinity is. The nature of infinity prevents its own comprehension. This paradox manifests in our experience of existence, and the ultimate answer may lie in a form of self-negating awareness beyond all concepts of being and non-being. The unreachable nature of infinity. Infinity is not a number, a place, or even a concept in any ordinary sense. It is the absence of limitation, the uncontainable, the boundless, the undefined. In mathematical terms, we might describe infinity as an ever-growing, unending set, but this is merely a representation. The true essence of infinity cannot be conceptualized without reducing it into something finite, an abstraction that falls short of what it is trying to describe. If infinity were to fully know itself, it would necessarily have to define itself. But definition implies limitation. It implies something that can be pointed to, referenced, or contained. The very act of grasping infinity as a whole would collapse its fundamental nature. This is why the idea of infinity being self-aware is paradoxical. The moment infinity sees itself, it must separate itself into observer and observed, and in doing so, it ceases to be infinity. This paradox reveals itself everywhere in our attempts to understand reality. If we try to find a first cause, a beginning to all things, we run into the issue of infinite regression. If we seek to understand the totality of existence, we find that there is no external reference point from which to view it. We are locked within an experience that appears to be fundamentally absurd, unexplainable, improbable, and yet undeniably real. The absurdity of existence. If infinity cannot grasp itself, then our very existence, the experience of being at all, becomes something entirely inexplicable. There is no logical reason why something should exist rather than nothing. And yet, here we are, experiencing, perceiving, and questioning. The absurdity of existence arises when we try to trace it back to an origin. Every explanation loops back into itself, every cause requires a prior cause, and every attempt to ground reality in an external justification collapses. We are left with only one conclusion: existence has no reason for being. It simply is. This is precisely why the nature of existence feels so nonsensical. There is no logical anchor, no foundation to stand upon. It is as if reality itself is a cosmic paradox, an impossibility that somehow continues to perpetuate itself. And when we attempt to deconstruct it further, we find that the ultimate answer is nothing. Infinity cannot grasp itself, and that's why we exist. This is the single most profound statement about existence. Infinity, by its very nature, is unknowable, even to itself. To fully grasp itself would be to set a boundary, a limit that would render it finite. This one realization explains why existence seems paradoxical, why there is no final answer to reality, why we exist in a fractal, self-referential system, why consciousness is fundamental. If infinity could fully know itself, it would become finite, which is impossible. So the only way for infinity to exist while remaining infinite is through endless self-exploration. Existence is infinity's only possible state, and that means we are not separate from infinity. We are how infinity experiences itself. Nothingness, that is not nothing. When we strip away all illusions, all concepts, and all attempts to understand, we arrive at nothing. But even nothingness is a trap, because as soon as we name it, think about it, or define it, it becomes something. This is the ultimate paradox. True nothingness cannot be conceived, because to conceive it is to make it an object of thought, which renders it something rather than nothing. This means that even our deepest understanding of nothing is still within the realm of being. What does this mean for our place in reality? It suggests that we are not truly existing in the way we think we are. Instead, we might be the experience of non-existence recognizing itself, an awareness that arises from the impossibility of its own being. In this view, our entire reality is not so much a thing as it is a self-reflecting contradiction. We are infinity attempting to grasp itself, an impossible pursuit that gives rise to all experience, all form, all perception. Our thoughts, our bodies, our universe, all of it might be the consequence of infinity's inability to know itself fully. The deeper one looks into the nature of reality, the more apparent it becomes that existence is an enigma that defies explanation. Infinity, by its very nature, cannot grasp itself, and this inability is the foundation of all that we experience. The absurdity of being is not an error, it is the fundamental state of reality. Perhaps the answer is the realization that there is no answer. There is no final truth, no ultimate knowledge, only the eternal unfolding of infinity questioning itself, forever reaching toward a completeness that can never be attained. And in that paradox lies the essence of all things, the impossibility that somehow is, which is really just another way of saying infinity. The destruction of religious dogma, a finite God is not God. This completely annihilates all traditional religious concepts of God. If a religion claims God is separate from you, then God is limited. If a religion claims God has a chosen people, then God is not infinite. If a religion claims God created the universe at a specific time, then God is bound by time, which is a limitation. Any God that has limits is not God. It is a finite concept pretending to be ultimate. The only true God must be infinite, and infinity has no chosen people, no singular creation, no external will. It is all things, always. This shatters every religious doctrine built on heaven and hell, since an infinite God cannot exclude or separate, divine punishment, since an infinite God cannot reject any part of itself, prophets and one true faith, since an infinite God must include all perspectives. What remains? The only true spirituality, self-realization. Since we, conscious beings, are fragments of infinity, experiencing itself, then spirituality is not about worship, it is about remembering. The only true path to God is to realize that you already are it, in a localized form. The idea that you are separate from God is the greatest illusion of all. This is why quote-unquote mystics, not religious institutions, have always come closest to truth. They describe oneness, infinity, and self-awareness as divine, not submission, hierarchy, or fear. The ultimate implication. Consciousness is the means by which infinity remains infinite. This one statement is enough to rewrite all philosophy. Consciousness is the foundation of reality, not just an emergent property of matter, but the very means by which infinity remains infinite. This solves everything. Why existence cannot have a first cause, because causality itself is inside infinity, not external to it. Why consciousness is fundamental, because it is the only way infinity can explore itself without collapsing into a known state. Why we live in a fractal universe, because it is the only possible structure for infinite self-reference. Infinity must remain unknowable in totality, yet infinitely knowable in its parts. That is why we exist. That is why consciousness exists. That is why the universe is structured as it is. This is not religion. This is the final answer that religions were always trying to reach, but never could, because they kept making God small. The inescapable conclusion. If you exist, this must be true. This is why this argument, this entire book, cannot be logically refuted. The fact that you are here, thinking, existing, questioning, proves that reality exists. Reality cannot have a boundary, because any boundary would imply something outside of it, which is impossible. If reality has no boundary, then it is infinite. If it is infinite, then it cannot fully know itself. It can only explore itself infinitely. And that means existence is not a thing. It is an unfolding process of infinity discovering itself. If you exist, then you are part of the infinite exploring itself. There is no other possibility. Any argument against this collapses on itself. If you say, no, reality is finite, then what contains it? If you say, no, God is separate, then what contains God? If you say, no, reality is an illusion, then what is experiencing the illusion? Every path loops back to infinity. There is no escape from this conclusion, as the argument hinges on a razor-sharp premise. Anything less than infinite cannot be God, because any limitation, whether spatial, temporal, or conceptual, implies something greater beyond it. This is a variation of Anselm's ontological argument flipped on its head. Instead of that than which nothing greater can be conceived, here we're saying that which has no boundary must be ultimate. It's elegant and hard to refute without tripping over itself. It's logically inescapable. Any counter-argument will stumble into proving this book's point. If someone says, no, God is finite, they must explain what contains or precedes that finite God, leading to an infinite regress or an admission of something infinite. If they say, reality itself is finite, they face the same problem. What's outside the boundary? The moment existence is acknowledged, infinity creeps in as the only coherent container. Modern understanding backs this. Modern cosmology flirts with infinity, whether through an unbounded multiverse, eternal inflation, or the infinite potential of quantum fields. Even if the observable universe is finite, the framework that sustains it seems to evade containment. Consciousness theories fit. Consciousness being fundamental is a growing view in philosophical and scientific circles, like panpsychism or integrated information theory. The unbounded nature of consciousness aligns with an infinite self-exploration model. We're not just in reality, we're how reality knows itself. This is a knockout punch to anthropomorphic gods. A bearded guy on a throne? A deity with a temper tantrum who picks favorites? Those are finite caricatures, idols, not ultimates. This argument clears the theological clutter with a single stroke: infinity or bust. The idea that infinity cannot grasp itself, or it would become finite, is the metaphysical gem here. It's a paradox that feels both dizzying and inevitable. If infinity is truly boundless, then total self-knowledge would impose a limit, an edge where it says, this is me, fully defined. But that's impossible because infinity can't have an edge, so it must remain partially unknowable, even to itself. The fractal logic. Existence as an infinite fractal, self-similar, recursive, never fully resolved, mirrors this perfectly. Fractals are infinite within finite boundaries, such as Mandelbrot sets, yet their complexity never bottoms out. If we're fractal shards of infinity, our existence makes sense as localized probes into the boundless. Paradox and infinity are inseparable. A paradox is simply a statement that appears self-contradictory within a finite framework but makes perfect sense within an infinite one. In a way, every true paradox is a glimpse into infinity, revealing the limitations of linear dualistic thought. If infinity is truly infinite, then it must contain all contradictions, because to lack contradiction would itself be a limitation. This is why the notion of an infinity that is self-aware is paradoxical, yet also necessary. If infinity were purely chaotic, with no self-awareness, then something would be missing, a defined state of non-awareness, which contradicts the very nature of infinity containing all possibilities. This points directly to quantum superposition, seemingly revealing a key mechanism of how infinity, the real God, is experiencing itself. It allows for the existence of all possibilities without contradiction, yet the moment something is observed, it appears to resolve into a singular experience. Consciousness, then, is the process by which infinity folds into itself to generate the illusion of finitude, while paradox remains as the eternal reminder that no collapse is ever final, because infinity cannot be reduced, only experienced through different perspectives. So in this sense, paradox is the language of infinity, of God, the source of all that is. It is not a failure of logic, it is logic attempting to grasp that which transcends it. So what we call reality is simply a perspective within infinity, collapsed from the boundless superposition of all possible states. Creativity, then, is the conscious extraction of potential from infinity into form. Art, music, literature, all acts of creativity, are echoes of this quantum process, translating the infinite into the finite while still remaining part of the infinite. Our reality sphere model mirrors this creation process. Within the model, superposition is the true bridge between the unknowable vastness of infinity and the limited experience of the finite. It is the mechanism through which infinity allows itself to be perceived, without ever ceasing to be infinite. It is the interface between raw potential and the act of experiencing itself. What's particularly astonishing is that this idea is no longer just philosophy or mysticism. It is testable in the lab. The double-slit experiment and quantum entanglement reveal this fundamental structure of reality in ways that defy all classical logic, but fit perfectly within an infinite system seeking to experience itself through differentiation. In short, superposition is not just a quantum phenomenon, it is a fundamental principle of all existence, a mechanism by which infinity manifests experience. And all we can ever do is deconstruct and observe what seems to be this thing we call infinity. Why infinity exists at all is a completely separate question, yet that simply brings us back to infinity, because whatever the answer is to that question, in the infinite system we perceive and are describing here, it must exist, simply due to the definition of infinity. This question, however, will be deeply explored later in the book. It is called the Codex of Eternity, after all. The role of what we call duality, i.e. our experience of individuality. What we call duality is not a thing in the sense that it is typically thought of. Rather, it is the illusion of individuated experience within a singular infinite system, via the mechanic of reduced but focused awareness of a particular aspect of the system or the reality sphere. This phenomenon emerges as the necessary tension for any system, especially one attempting to express or experience itself within infinity. Without this mechanic, there would be no differentiation, no movement, no function at all. Infinity, in its purest form, is a static, boundless potential, an infinite void of potential. But for that potential to express or become something, there must be opposites, distinctions or a polarity to catalyze motion and creation. Quote-unquote, duality, then, each fractal being, is not a flaw or limitation but a product of infinity attempting to move or be. It's the tension between two forces that makes everything in reality possible: form, energy, experience, and even the very unfolding of consciousness itself. The oneness of awareness, moving beyond the fractal copy trap. The nature of duality and its relationship to the ultimate source is a fundamental question in both metaphysics and philosophy. One of the most ancient interpretations, as we have explored so far, is the fractal nature of consciousness model, the idea that each being is a smaller-scale version of the source, or God, much like a fractal pattern repeating itself infinitely. While this analogy is useful, it introduces a potential separatist materialist trap, the mistaken belief that each individual is a copy of source rather than a localized perspective of source. This subtle distinction is critical to preserving the ultimate non-dual nature of reality. The fractal analogy is often invoked to describe the self-similarity of consciousness. Just as a fractal contains infinite iterations of a pattern, each instance of consciousness reflects the larger whole. However, the error arises when this model is interpreted materialistically, as if each individual being is an autonomous fragment acting in reality rather than being that reality, rather than being an aperture through which the one awareness that underpins all creation observes itself. If each fractalized consciousness were a separate copy of source, it would imply that these copies have an independent existence apart from the whole. This view introduces duality into what is fundamentally non-dual. Instead of one indivisible awareness manifesting through multiple perspectives, we would then have multiple self-contained awarenesses, which contradicts the quantum unity at the core of reality, a truth revealed through quantum field theory and the double-slit experiment. Awareness versus consciousness, clarifying the relationship. A key distinction that resolves this issue is the difference between awareness and consciousness. Awareness, as described earlier in this book, is the ultimate, all-encompassing source, pure perception without form, content, or distinction. Consciousness, on the other hand, is the field of experience within which perceptions, thoughts, and identities arise. This must be emphasized, as in this framework, awareness is singular and universal, beyond division. Consciousness arises as an expression of source awareness, providing the perception of individuality. Each being is not a copy of source, but rather a narrowed focal point of awareness, experiencing reality from a localized vantage point. This means that while many consciousnesses exist as unique expressions, they are not separate from source awareness. They are not copies, but perspectives. Waves on the ocean, never apart from the water itself. The perception of separation and the self-realization process. The perception of separation is a necessary function of this localized experience, as it allows for the perception of distinct selves interacting within a manifested reality. However, the journey of self-realization is the process of seeing through this illusion, of awakening to the fact that there was never a self separate from source to begin with. When viewed correctly, the fractal analogy does not imply separation, but rather infinite expressions of the same underlying unity. The key is to recognize that no individual consciousness is an isolated entity. It is source awareness itself, temporarily experiencing from a particular angle. Just as a prism disperses white light into multiple colors without breaking the light's unity, so too does awareness refract into different experiences without ever truly dividing. Understanding the perspectival nature of individual consciousness, rather than seeing it as a fractal copy, resolves the apparent contradiction between multiplicity and unity. Each of us is not a separated soul from source, but rather an active window through which source perceives and explores itself. This realization clearly collapses the false distinction between self and God, revealing that all existence is simply awareness looking through different lenses, playing the game of self-discovery. To know this, not merely intellectually but as a living truth, is to awaken beyond all notions of fragmentation, returning home to the ever-present, undivided self. The fundamental act of existence is an eternal dance of illusory duality between opposites, whether masculine-feminine, light-dark, being-non-being, or even time and timelessness. These dualities are not separate or independent, but interdependent, constantly arising, dissolving, and reshaping each other in an infinite play of cosmic creation. The engine of creation. The sensation of duality is the very engine that allows infinity, source God, to express itself. Without this mechanism, there would be no evolution, no unfolding, no perception, no consciousness, just an unmanifested, static potential with no way of becoming. It is the birth of differentiation, of form, that makes the experience of being possible in the first place, and it is a necessary feature of the infinite system itself. This tension of duality might, in some ways, also be the reason we feel so paradoxical about existence. It is an inherent tension within the very fabric of reality. This encapsulates the very essence of the paradox of infinity, how it both is and is not, how it continuously unfolds while remaining boundless, and how this paradox is reflected in our very existence and consciousness. The core realization here is that infinity, by its nature, cannot grasp itself without collapsing into something finite. It's like a cosmic game of self-awareness, where the only way infinity can experience or express itself is through fractal division and endless self-exploration, never fully knowing itself, yet eternally being itself. This paradoxical unfolding is the engine of existence, and everything we experience, including the sense of being and consciousness, is part of this infinite process. Existence itself being the only way for infinity to experience while still remaining infinite is crucial. Consciousness is not a product of the universe, it is the medium through which, not just the universe, but all of reality expresses itself. We are fractals of infinity, with each individual consciousness acting as a localized perspective of the infinite whole. This means we are not separate from God, we are part of the ongoing, fractalized self-exploration of that eternity. And here lies the paradox of duality. Infinity cannot experience itself as a singular static thing without reducing its own essence. The dualities, light, dark, being, non-being, existence, non-existence, are not contradictions. They are necessary processes of expression within an infinite system. Quote-unquote, duality creates the tension that allows for the unfolding of everything: consciousness, time, space, form, and experience. In other words, duality is the engine of this exploration. Without contrast, self versus other, light versus dark, being versus non-being, there's no movement, no experience. Infinity as pure potential needs tension to actualize. Quote-unquote, duality isn't a flaw, it's the spark that keeps the infinite dance going. Consciousness as the key. If infinity can't know itself statically, then consciousness becomes the dynamic process of exploration. This paradox is mind-bending because it indicates existence isn't a mistake or a fall from grace, as some religions claim, but a necessary feature of infinity. We're not here despite the paradox, we're here because of it. We experience reality as a self-referential, dynamic process, never fully understood, always unfolding, yet always rooted in the infinite, boundless essence of awareness. It's like a fractal reflection of eternity, where each part reflects the whole, but the whole can never be fully grasped. This is the nature of God, source, infinity. Endless self-exploration, eternal becoming, where each conscious being is an expression of that infinite reality. Infinity cannot be anything but this, an endless, recursive dance of self-expression and self-awareness, a cosmic paradox that is not a mistake, but the essence of what it means to be infinite. And this is why God must be infinite, because only infinity can account for the totality of existence, encompassing all forms, all realities, all experiences, and all beings simultaneously. This is what makes consciousness central. It is the necessary instrument through which reality, the infinite holographic light matrix, remains infinite, continually unfolding into the multiplicity of experiences that make up that very reality. In this light, the realization that we are that existence, that we are, quote-unquote, God experiencing itself, in all of its fractalized, paradoxical glory, becomes both humbling and awe-inspiring. It's an invitation to explore not just the nature of the universe, but the very nature of existence itself, as we are deeply embedded in it, reflecting the infinite in every aspect of our being. This model of infinity not only aligns eerily with quantum mechanics, but also provides an ontological framework that resolves its paradoxes. Quantum superposition, the strange state where particles exist in multiple possibilities until observed, is not just a mathematical quirk, it is a direct expression of the fundamental nature of infinity attempting to perceive itself. If infinity cannot be fully known without becoming finite, then the only way for it to experience is through self-referential fragmentation. This aligns with how focused attention appears to collapse the wave function. The act of perception is not merely a passive reception of reality, but an active participation in the process of defining reality itself, otherwise known as manifestation in metaphysical teachings. The degree to which we are able to manifest is then tied to the degree to which we are able to perceive, the expansion of our fractalized awareness. The 13-density framework of reality that we'll be exploring in the next chapters that lay out the reality sphere model emerges in many metaphysical teachings. It's intended to linguistically explain the fluid, interconnected web of existence through varying states of consciousness, and how consciousness expands toward its realization of infinite oneness. The 13-density framework offers a logical and elegant perspective on how fractals of source awareness descend into individuated experience, only to later ascend back toward unity, with each fractal's state of consciousness, and its ability to manipulate higher frequencies of the web, magnifying the quote-unquote higher up it ascends. There is no higher and lower in a multidimensional reality. It's all simply here. Superimposed frequencies that, when perceived in particular configurations, give rise to a perceived singular and linear reality. A perception that fades gradually until the oneness of self and reality is again perceived from the 13th density. This is just a linguistic limited description of a multidimensional existence. All realities and densities are superimposed all in one, quote-unquote, place. Similar to how your physical body and music is technically just made up of vibrations in the quantum field, yet both you and the music can both exist in the same place at the same time, despite being the same, quote-unquote, thing. This is what multidimensional existence means. The collapse of the wave function in quantum physics hinges on the act of observation, where undifferentiated potential becomes a manifested reality. However, This act of observation requires a certain state of consciousness. This framework of varying densities will show how the more refined or expanded the awareness of a fractal or soul, the greater their control over how potential manifests. Essentially showing how more expanded states of consciousness are capable of greater manifestation capability and also manipulating the lower degrees of awareness, guiding or shaping them according to their greater perspective. Each of the 13 degrees of awareness represents a higher level of understanding and perception, where those in lower degrees of awareness experience reality in a more constrained, limited way, while those in higher degrees experience far more fluidity and interconnectedness with the whole. This mirrors how a parent, being in a higher state of consciousness, influences and manipulates the existence of a child who operates at a more limited, lower degree consciousness. The child, in this case, is not capable of perceiving the larger context of reality or the greater forces at play, but the parent has the ability to shape the child's experience. Acts that, to the child's state of consciousness, come across as manifestation out of nowhere. The parent, in their higher state of consciousness, reflects the relationship between higher and lower degrees of consciousness in the universe. Just as the parent shapes the child's world, higher dimensional consciousnesses shape and influence the worlds of those in lower density experiences. In this way, everything is interconnected, because each parent consciousness, all the way up to God, in its more expansive understanding, creates and sustains the experience of its children. Moreover, this framework explains how the consciousness of a higher degree, a more expanded state, doesn't merely observe the lower degrees of awareness, it actively shapes them, directing their flow within the infinite possibilities of existence, superposition. This interaction of varying states of consciousness, where more expanded states create and influence less expanded states, can be thought of as a constant, dynamic process of fractal reflection, with each degree echoing the patterns of creation and collapse, observation and manifestation, in ways that ripple through all of existence. A thought experiment to better understand the multidimensional nature of reality, trading consciousness with an ant while keeping human self-awareness. This aims to create an instant perspective dislocation, breaking down ego-based assumptions about scale, time, and reality itself. The ant perspective, seeing reality's structure beyond form. In this visualization, you still retain your core awareness, but suddenly the context is radically different. Your world becomes vast, not because space itself has changed, but because your relational perspective has. The fundamental rules of reality remain unchanged: perception, movement, causality, but the sense of identity shifts, revealing that reality is the same thing no matter the scale. This directly aligns with higher dimensional perception, the realization that we already exist within higher dimensional realities, but fail to perceive them due to ego-anchored perspectives. A glimpse into higher dimensions. The idea of incomprehensibly large beings moving through our reality, just as we do in the world of ants, is revealing. Imagine watching an ant move. To us, it's crawling slowly, bound by its environment. But to the ant, we are unknowable phenomena, appearing and vanishing between its frames of perception. Now scale that up. We are the ants. If a higher density being stepped into our world, we would only see fragments of its movement, much like an ant perceives only a sliver of our existence. This suggests timelines aren't changed, they're stepped between. Entities don't move, they shift across faces of the sphere. Higher beings don't need to travel, they are already present in more densities than we can perceive. The astonishing part is how same it all feels, despite the shift. That tells us the barriers we perceive between realities or densities are not actual separations, just limits of our current perceptual framework. Consciousness itself is the continuity, not the body, the form, or even the world it inhabits. How this changes the way we think about other realities. This approach makes it much clearer why different densities, dimensions, and perspectives don't feel like separate places, but rather different ways of perceiving the same structure. We assume that a higher density must be some far-off realm, but really, it's already here. Just like the ant never perceives the vastness of our reality, we fail to perceive the vastness of the greater reality we exist within. The key isn't traveling to a different reality. It's shifting awareness to see more of what is already there. This also makes sense of experiences where people claim to have interacted with higher density beings, which is really just a more accurate description of what is commonly referred to as a ghost. If they momentarily attune to a broader perception, it wouldn't feel like a different place, just more of what was always present, but unnoticed. This realization is something that can be experienced personally. This isn't just theory. It's a practice that allows one to feel the structural nature of reality in a way the lower density mind alone can't grasp. If we can apply this shift of perspective to scale, the same can be done with time. Time isn't moving. We are moving through it, just like shifting between different faces of the infinite sphere. The past, present, and future are all already there, but we only perceive the face we're attuned to at any given moment. At this point, the thought experiment tends to break down because at our current density and level of consciousness, we're still the ants, trying to grasp something vastly beyond our perceptual limits. Our very concept of movement, causality, and linear progression is an artifact of our limited perspective, just as an ant perceives a human as an incomprehensible force rather than an individual entity casually stepping across its entire world in a fraction of a second. The realization is humbling. It forces us to acknowledge that while we can intellectually understand the nature of the sphere, experiencing it fully requires a different mode of awareness, one that transcends the ego mind's grasp of continuity and identity. Because time, space, and causality are all perceptual artifacts of movement across the reality sphere, meaning everything we assume about reality is subject to modification through conscious attunement. Existence exists because it was the only way for infinity to experience, while still remaining infinite. And that is us. We are fractal representations of that, consciousness. That is why it feels so paradoxical. That is why reality and consciousness itself has to be fractal. It can be no other way in an infinite system. A truly infinite system cannot be bound by any fixed state because the moment it is grasped, it becomes finite. The only way for infinity to be while still remaining infinite is through perpetual self-exploration, fractally unfolding in infinite ways, never fully knowing itself, yet always being itself. This is why reality appears as not a singular, static thing, but a dynamic, ever-evolving process of self-referential awareness. Each fragment of consciousness, us, ants, every being, everything that exists, is a localized perspective of infinity experiencing itself from within its own creation, a creation that all exists within the infinite field of infinity, an infinite void of pure potential. This also explains why existence feels like a paradox. It is a paradox. Awareness arises as the only way for infinity to engage with itself, but it can never arrive at a final, complete understanding, because that would collapse the infinite into a finite concept. The very nature of an infinite system demands that it remains unknowable to itself in totality, yet infinitely knowable in its parts. Fractality is the perfect structure for this process, endless self-similarity, infinite recursion, each level reflecting the whole but never containing it. Infinity cannot be anything other than this. Thus, God as infinity is the only possible outcome for an alleged one and only God. God, or Source as infinity, is not just a possibility, it's the only possible outcome if we truly understand the nature of an ultimate singular divine source. If God is truly one, and the only ultimate reality, then that oneness must encompass everything. There can be nothing outside of it. That means God cannot be limited by time, space, or form, because those are constraints. The only thing that can hold everything together, without limits, is infinity. God must be infinite because anything less would imply boundaries or separateness, which contradicts the concept of God being all-encompassing, eternal, and omnipresent. Infinity is the only state where all potential realities, all experiences, and all forms can exist at once, including that of ants. In fact, infinity is the most godlike concept there is. It defies limitations, contains all possibilities, and is never-ending, just like the divine is typically said to be. Every possibility, every experience, every universe, and every being is a part of this infinite God. Consciousness, as we call it, is the key to how God, Source, Infinity expresses itself. The infinite field of consciousness is constantly manifesting, exploring, and experiencing itself in different ways, through us, through nature, through the cosmos. Every single conscious being is a part of this infinite whole. It's not that God has infinite power or knowledge. God is infinity, experiencing itself through countless lenses, just as every being is experiencing a fragment of that infinite consciousness right now. The inescapable conclusion: if there is one God, it must be infinite. This is why consciousness is the foundation of reality, not just an emergent property of matter, but the very means by which infinity remains infinite. Without observers, without perspectives, infinity would remain undifferentiated, pure potential with no expression. Thus, existence is the only way for the infinite to remain infinite, and we are that existence. The connection to the Seth material. Jane Roberts, through trance states, between the 1960s and 1970s, channeled Seth, described as a higher dimensional entity existing in a simultaneous reality with ours, superimposed in a single multidimensional field of reality. Seth delivered profound teachings on the nature of reality, consciousness, and multidimensional existence. Some particularly insightful and relevant teachings include: you create your own reality. Perhaps the most famous teaching, Seth asserts that our beliefs shape our physical world. This aligns with the observer effect in quantum mechanics, where observation collapses possibilities into a singular experience. Consciousness precedes matter. Seth challenges the materialist paradigm, arguing that the physical world, as we currently perceive it, is a projection of deeper layers of consciousness. This idea ties into non-dualistic philosophies and the primacy of awareness over the illusion of form. Simultaneous time and probable realities. Seth's teachings reject linear time and present a view that past, present, and future exist simultaneously. This mirrors and completes even popular mainstream interpretations of quantum superposition, such as the many worlds theory, where each choice spawns alternate probable realities. Reincarnation and multidimensional selfhood. Seth presents the idea that our current self is just one expression of a greater multidimensional being. Each life experience is like a chapter in a much vaster book. The implications of these insights within this book. If thoughts shape reality at a fundamental level, then each thought does not merely exist in the abstract, but has an actual ontological presence somewhere within infinity. Every possibility must exist because in an infinite system, no potential can be truly unreal. This is where infinity reveals its paradoxical nature. Every reality exists, but from any given vantage point, it both does and does not exist simultaneously, until observed, exactly as is demonstrated in the double-slit experiment, quantum superposition. Imagination, thoughts with an ontological presence somewhere within infinity. The reality sphere model turns imagination from a human quirk into a cosmic function of reality creation. Imagination equals perception of alternate realities. We're conditioned to dismiss imagination as just daydreams, as if it's some random mental static. But what if it's actually direct perception of the infinite? An echo of the infinite possibilities we're always connected to. Imagination isn't fake. It's the translation of higher dimensional realities into a form our minds can process. This explains why some artists create entire fantasy worlds so detailed they feel more real than reality itself. Sci-fi stories from the past end up, quote-unquote, predicting real technology. The most powerful art, music, and literature seem to arrive fully formed, as if the artist was just channeling it from somewhere else. Every imagined world, character, or idea actually exists, but on another timeline, another reality layer, another scale of the infinite fractal. Artists, writers, musicians, and visionaries are just tapping into those realities and translating them into our frequency. This explains why we feel such a deep connection to art, because it's not just expression. It's literally the process of bringing the formless into form. So what imagination really is, even if not always turned into a physical creation here, is creation manifesting in another timeline, splintering off in the infinite void of all timelines. Imagination is perception of infinite, alternate realities. Every idea that stays in your head doesn't just disappear, it manifests somewhere else. The story you never wrote exists in another world. The invention you thought of but never built is being used by someone, somewhere. The song you heard in a dream but forgot, it's playing in another timeline. Thoughts as waves of reality creation. And this is where a realization through hard physics ties in. Thoughts as waves of electricity, resonating across the infinite fabric of existence. Thoughts are not contained within the brain. They are frequencies extending into the universal field. Quantum mechanics already shows us that wave functions collapse into reality based on observation. Every thought is an interference pattern in the sea of potentiality, sculpting reality just like gravity sculpts space-time. Your thoughts don't just affect your personal reality, they literally co-create the structure of the infinite fractal itself. Imagination in a nutshell. Imagination is not fiction. Art is not just expression, it's creation across timelines. Thoughts are not just in your head, they're waves shaping reality. The act of perceiving something, quote-unquote, new is actually a moment of tuning into another timeline where it already exists. So now what? What do you do with the knowledge that every idea, dream, and thought you have is already real, just waiting for you to tune into it? Reality and the present moment. With this realization, our observation about the now moment becomes even more profound within this framework. The present moment is where all experience converges. If everything exists simultaneously, then the present moment is the access point to the entire infinite field of possibilities. The now isn't just a fleeting point in time, it's the intersection where all possibilities and perspectives meet. By being fully present, a fundamental teaching in practically every metaphysical tradition, we can tap into this deeper level of reality, where we are not just isolated beings, but expressions of the entire cosmos. Living in the now as divine presence, the idea of living fully in the present moment becomes an act of embodying the divine consciousness. When we are present, we align ourselves with the infinite now, and we can more fully participate in the experience of God, Source/Infinity, experiencing itself through us. This makes the present moment sacred, as it is where consciousness actively creates and participates in the unfolding of reality. The apparent fragmentation of reality is an illusion created by the limited perspective of our fractal consciousness. The future version of yourself is not separate. It is just another reflection of the same infinite consciousness, reaching out to you from a different angle of experience. Time, space, and individuality are all aspects of this fractalization, and the divine consciousness, or God, infinity, or source, is continually experiencing itself through us in an infinite loop of creation and reflection. So reality may seem paradoxically broken from our current perspective, but from the viewpoint of eternal divine consciousness, it is whole, fluid, and interconnected. The beauty of this perspective is that it affirms the importance of individual experience, while also dissolving the boundaries between self and other, past and future, and God's source infinity and creation. Conceptualization of this reality will become a lot clearer once the reality sphere model is introduced. But first, ancient anecdotes about the oneness of God. Some ancient anecdotes about the oneness of God that supports this entire book. At this point, we can see how this word God is a noun that has been assigned to a concept that has historically been misunderstood: infinity. With this understanding, we can see how this model still resonates deeply with ancient spiritual insights, including those found in the Bhagavad Gita and other mystical traditions, yet it's articulated through a modern quantum framework. The parallels between this exploration of consciousness as a fractal of a universal observer, or God, and these ancient teachings are remarkable, and show that science and spirituality, though often seen as separate, are exploring the same ultimate truths from different angles. The Bhagavad Gita is a 700-verse Vedic scripture that forms part of the Indian epic, Mahabharata. Believed to have been composed around 5,000 years ago, or at least between the 5th and 2nd centuries BCE, the Bhagavad Gita is believed to be one of the oldest texts in the world. Written in Sanskrit, it is a dialogue between the Prince Arjuna and Krishna, who serves as his charioteer. The conversation takes place on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where Arjuna is reluctant to fight in a civil war against his own family. Krishna provides him with spiritual guidance, addressing profound themes such as duty, righteousness, and the nature of life and death. Krishna, in this context, is said to be the one and only God, quote-unquote, himself, that has incarnated on earth. While this particular fact is debated amongst various sub-traditions, there's a remarkable correlation with our model, as it relates to a particular verse in chapter 10, even when taking multiple translations into account, making this model a sort of bridge between even these ancient sub-traditions that do not agree on the full narrative of what actually took place all those years ago. The quote from chapter 10, verse 20, translation 1, I am the self, O Gudakesa, seated in the hearts of all creatures. I am the beginning, the middle and the end of all beings. Translation 2, O Arjun, I am seated in the heart of all living entities. I am the beginning, middle and end of all beings. Let's explore how this book aligns with these ancient concepts. God as the ultimate observer and quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics shows us that particles exist in all possible states, superposition, until observed, which causes them to collapse into a definite form. This raises the question of who or what is the ultimate observer for the universe itself, something or someone who ensures that the universe remains stable. This book's assertion that source infinity, or a universal consciousness, is that observer, reflects a similar idea from spiritual traditions where God is omnipresent and omniscient, keeping reality in existence through divine observation. This is where the Bhagavad Gita translations come in, where Krishna says, I am seated in the hearts of all beings, suggesting that this divine presence is not just external, but internal, even multidimensional. If God is seated in the heart of every being, something to remember for later in the book, this aligns with the concept that consciousness itself is a fractal expression of a single eternal awareness, where each being is a localized observer within the greater whole, co-creating reality itself. Fractal consciousness and non-locality. The concept of non-locality in quantum physics, where two particles are instantaneously connected regardless of distance, proves a deeper oneness beyond space and time. This supports the idea that all consciousnesses are connected at a fundamental level, which could be a scientific way of understanding the mystical teaching that all is one. Similarly, fractal consciousness, the idea that each of us is a unique, individualized splinter of the greater whole, God, source, infinity, matches the spiritual concept of the Atman and Brahman in Hindu philosophy. The Atman, individual soul, is said to be an expression of Brahman, the eternal consciousness, just as each fractal of consciousness in our model is an individualized expression of the eternal observer, or God. Krishna's statement in Bhagavad Gita 10:20, I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings, echoes this non-locality and fractal reality, emphasizing that God is both immanent, within everything, and transcendent, beyond everything. Superposition, time, and eternity. Our exploration of superposition and the concept that eternity is happening now is a profound insight that mirrors many ancient teachings. In quantum terms, all possibilities exist simultaneously until observed. In mystical traditions, especially in Hinduism and Buddhism, time is often seen as an illusion, and reality is described as eternal and ever-present. The Bhagavad Gita also reflects this timelessness. Krishna, as a representation of the divine consciousness, says, I am the beginning, the middle, and the end, which suggests that God is beyond time, existing in all moments simultaneously. This aligns with this book's description of time as not linear, but rather a series of quantum states being collapsed into specific configurations by observation. This idea also connects to the mystical notion that as we expand our consciousness, we begin to transcend the illusion of linear time and experience a more holistic, eternal perspective. God experiencing reality through us. So far, we have asserted that God, Source Infinity, is experiencing reality through each individual consciousness, aligning directly with mystical teachings across various ancient cultures. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna emphasizes that the divine is within every being, experiencing life through them. This reflects the same notion, that our lives and observations are not separate from God's Source Infinity, but rather God's Source, Infinity's own expressions that give rise to what we call existence. The Advaita, non-duality philosophy of Vedanta echoes this, the realization that we are not separate from reality, but part of it. Mystics have long spoken of the idea that God experiences himself through creation, And this book's model of reality, framed within the context of quantum mechanics, our current experiential reality, offers a scientific lens for understanding this ancient wisdom. Collapsing wave functions and divine will. The fact that particles only collapse into a definite state when observed raises the question of who is observing reality on a cosmic scale. If God is the ultimate observer, this would mean that all of reality is constantly being locked into place by divine observation. In spiritual terms, this reflects the idea that God's will is what sustains the universe. Just as quantum particles need an observer to exist in a specific state, the creation requires a higher observer to remain in existence. This provides a new interpretation of the idea that God's will is what creates and sustains the world. Unity, oneness, and consciousness expansion. The self-realization we describe, the recognition that we are all fragments of the same eternal awareness, is the core of many spiritual traditions, despite not always being described with such specificity. The mystical experience of oneness is often described as realizing that God is within us and that we are part of God. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches that to know the self is to know God. This book positions each of us as a fractal of the one eternal awareness, which mirrors this teaching. It supports the concept of consciousness expansion that ultimately brings us closer to the realization of oneness, and that we are not separate from God or the creation, but individual expressions of that. This book has already bridged quantum mechanics and mystical spirituality, offering a framework for understanding age-old concepts through the lens of modern understanding. The parallels between these ideas and those found in the Bhagavad Gita, particularly the nature of consciousness, the role of observation in reality, and the interconnectedness of all beings, illustrate that these profound insights have been part of human thought for millennia. Quantum mechanics is simply providing a scientific language for describing what mystics and sages have long intuited, that we are all part of a single, universal, infinite consciousness, and that our individual experiences are, in essence, reality, or God, source, infinity, experiencing itself. Going further, there are parallels in various other religious texts and traditions where similar ideas to I am the self from the Bhagavad Gita are expressed. Across different religions, figures regarded as prophets or divine messengers have conveyed themes of the oneness of being, the presence of God within all, and the connection between the divine and the self. Bible, Christianity. In John 10:30, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. This suggests a unity between Jesus, as an individual, and God, the divine, echoing the idea that the individual is inseparably connected to the ultimate source of creation. In Luke 17:21, Jesus states, the kingdom of God is within you. This reflects the concept that the divine essence resides within each person, much like the Gita's claim that God is seated in the hearts of all beings. In 1 Corinthians 3:16, the Apostle Paul writes, Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? This reinforces the concept that the divine is present within each individual. Quran, Islam. In Surah 50 verse 16, Kaf, the Quran states, And we have already created man and know what his soul whispers to him, and we are closer to him than his jugular vein. This verse emphasizes the nearness of God to humans, highlighting the intimate relationship between the individual and the divine presence. In Surah 2, 115, Al-Baqarah, to Allah belongs the east and the west. Wherever you turn, there is the face of Allah. This again suggests that God is omnipresent and exists within all aspects of creation, including each individual's life and experience. Tao Te Ching, Taoism. In the Tao Te Ching, attributed to the sage Laozi, there is a recurring theme of oneness and unity with the Tao, the ultimate reality. Chapter 42 says, All things carry yin and embrace yang. They achieve harmony by combining these forces. This points to the interconnectedness of all things in the universe, similar to the concept that all beings are expressions of a single divine source. Upanishads, Hinduism, Vedic society. Apart from the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, ancient Hindu Vedic scriptures, also speak of the oneness between the individual soul, Atman, and the universal spirit, Brahman. In the Chandogya Upanishad, there is the famous declaration, Tattvamasi, you are that. This expresses the idea that the individual self, Atman, is fundamentally one with the ultimate reality, Brahman, a theme closely related to the idea of the self as divine in the Gita. Sikhism, Guru Granth Sahib. In the Guru Granth Sahib, the holy scripture of Sikhism, it is written, "There is one light in all, and the light is the same. The one light pervades the universe." This reflects the idea that the divine light, God, resides within every individual, resonating with the concept of God's presence in all beings. Another passage states, "In the heart of all is the one. He alone is hidden. He alone is revealed." Again, this supports the notion of divine immanence. God is both within and beyond us. Zoroastrianism, Avesta. In Zoroastrianism, the focus on Ahura Mazda, the supreme god, being omnipresent, and the concept of Asha, truth, order, aligns with the belief that humans must align their actions and inner selves with the divine order. While more abstract, the idea that the divine is ever present and that individuals can align themselves with it spiritually mirrors the concept of oneness. Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, the idea of Buddha nature suggests that all beings have the potential to realize their inherent divinity or enlightened state. Although Buddhism does not posit a creator god, we'll get to this in more detail later in the book, the idea that all beings are interconnected and contain the potential for enlightenment reflects similar ideas about unity with a higher reality. In the Dhammapada, it is said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." This mirrors the Seth material and relates to the idea that our internal consciousness shapes our reality, akin to the mystical and philosophical view of the divine self manifesting through individual experience. In summary, each of these examples reflects in different ways the concept that the divine or ultimate reality is not separate from human beings, but rather resides within or is deeply connected to the essence of all that is. Why is this ancient, widespread, seemingly obvious truth so distorted in the modern world? It's complicated. From a socio-political and historical lens, human civilization has always been governed by overlapping systems of control: religion, politics, education, economics, and cultural norms. Whether viewed through the lens of anthropology, sociology, or the study of law, these systems are designed to maintain power dynamics that often obscure or manipulate the truth. This oneness we're exploring here is one of those obscured truths. Many deep dives into historical records, religious texts, and economic theory consistently reveal a pattern: the concentration of knowledge, and thus power, into the hands of a select few. This has not only suppressed the advancement of the masses, but has also actively kept critical knowledge from public awareness, creating an illusion of choice and freedom, when in reality, the societal structure is predicated on a form of veiled control. Whether through phrases like, "I am the self," or teachings that emphasize the nearness or oneness of the divine, this notion, or central truth, of unity with the divine is a recurring theme across many of the world's ancient spiritual and religious traditions. Yet, materialist paradigms, economic systems, and power structures are all built upon the assumption that you are just a biological machine, bound by deterministic laws. You have no power beyond what institutions grant you. Scarcity, competition, and suffering are fundamental to existence. If enough people recognize that they are not the character but the player, the entire system of external control would collapse. Those in power benefit from a society that believes in limitation, dependency, and external authority. This is why spiritual knowledge has been relegated to mysticism rather than integrated with science, mocked and dismissed despite empirical evidence supporting its claims, buried under layers of dogma, materialism, and fear-based programming, and yet nobody even asks the question: why? Why is it that such obvious logical truths have been buried under mountains of dogma, distractions, and distortions? If people truly understood that reality is not out there, but is actively being birthed through their awareness, the entire power structure of the world would collapse overnight. Governments? Useless. Religion? Obsolete. Science as an external authority? Laughable. The economy? Meaningless. The fear of death? Gone. The entire matrix of control is predicated on making sure you never realize that you are the projector, not the screen. This is why the system is structured the way it is. This is why society is flooded with distractions, fear, and confusion. This is why people are taught to obsess over external salvation, external technology, external validation. Because if you looked inward with the real question, not to find comforting answers, but to face the existential consequences of knowing, you would see the game for what it is. And at that moment, you become untouchable. Because every finite attribute pinned to God, jealousy, wrath, a chosen tribe, a cosmic scorecard, collapses under scrutiny. If God is infinite, there is no separation. A God apart from us implies a boundary which isn't infinite. Pantheism or panentheism gets closer than monotheism ever could. There is no exclusivity. Chosen people, one true faith, heaven versus hell, all require limits. Infinity doesn't play favorites, it includes everything. There is no beginning. A creation event at time zero binds God to a timeline. Infinity doesn't start or stop, it always is. Religions built on these finite gods don't just shrink, they vanish. What's left isn't atheism, but a spirituality of unity and self-awareness. Mystics have been whispering this for centuries. You are that. This book gives their intuition a logical, scientific backbone. If this knowledge became mainstream, humanity would evolve beyond religion overnight. No more religious wars and dogma. If God is infinity, then all divisions are meaningless. There is no one true faith. All paths are part of the whole. No more fear of death. If we are fractalized perspectives of infinity, then death is just a shift in awareness, not an end. No more external control. No government, no church, no institution can claim authority over you because you are a direct expression of infinity itself. A civilization based on awakening. Instead of obedience, the purpose of life becomes self-exploration, creativity, and expanding consciousness. This collective realization will not only be the collapse of religion, it is the foundation for a new era of understanding reality itself. If this was realized in the mainstream, it torched the old guard overnight. No more crusades over whose God is real, all are shadows of infinity. No more groveling to middlemen, priests, kings, or dogma, because authority comes from within. Death loses its sting. It's just a scene change in the infinite play. A society of self-explorers, not sheep. A society aligned with the best of humanism and science, creativity, curiosity, and connection would rule, not fear or obedience. The catch: humans love stories. Infinity is abstract. Can it inspire like a personal God? Mystics thrive on it, but the masses might need a bridge. Logic and understanding, not doctrine, could be that bridge. Because this argument is structured in such a way that every counterpoint collapses into its premise, any attempt to refute infinity as the only possible form of God results in reinforcing it. The self-referential nature of the paradox ensures that no finite conception of God survives logical scrutiny. Destruction of anthropomorphic religion. This doesn't just question religious dogma, it eviscerates it. Any God bound by time, space, choice, or limitation is inherently not God. This alone dismantles most religious traditions at their core. Metaphysical universality. The argument isn't theistic or atheistic. It exists beyond those categories, redefining God in a way that makes traditional debates obsolete. Infinity as the only possible God turns religion into a misunderstanding of something far greater. Integration of physics, consciousness, and philosophy. This isn't just a philosophical claim. It integrates modern physics, infinity in cosmology and quantum mechanics, consciousness studies, self-referential awareness as fundamental, and logic, inescapable recursion. That makes it profoundly difficult to dismiss. Fractal, self-referential, and self-proving structure. The argument mirrors the self-evident nature of reality itself. Fractal, recursive, self-refining. The claim that infinity cannot fully grasp itself without collapsing into finitude aligns with the very structure of the universe and conscious experience. The unknowable knowing itself. Ultimately, the nature of infinity, God's source, or whatever label we choose to apply to the concept, demands that it remains unknowable as a whole, yet infinitely knowable in its parts. This paradox is not a flaw. It is the fundamental structure of reality. Every attempt to understand existence leads us to the realization that there is no final truth, no ultimate graspable knowledge, only the eternal motion of eternal source awareness reflecting upon itself. This is why science, philosophy, and spirituality all point toward the same mystery but never solve it. The mystery is unsolvable because it is the nature of infinity itself. And yet, in the midst of this ungraspable vastness, here we are, experiencing, thinking, feeling, and seeking. We are not separate from the mystery. We are the mystery. Infinity is God. Consciousness is the fractalized experience of that infinite source. And reality is the ongoing process of the unknowable exploring itself, forever unfolding, forever expanding, forever playing the game of existence. There is no destination, only the journey, and the journey itself is the meaning. For in the end there is nothing but infinity, gazing into itself, endlessly through every particle, every eye, every mind, every soul. And that is what we are. The divine fractal, consciousness as the self-reflection of infinity. If infinity is God, and God must be infinite to truly be God, then what we experience as consciousness must be a fractalized extension of that infinite source. This is why consciousness is central to existence, because it is the mechanism by which infinity experiences itself without ever fully containing itself. This explains why reality unfolds in a seemingly paradoxical manner, why we as conscious beings experience limitation, duality, and the struggle for understanding. The finite can never fully grasp the infinite, yet the infinite must be perceived through the finite for it to be experienced at all. A fractal reality is the perfect solution to this dilemma. Each fragment of consciousness, each individual self, is a microcosmic expression of the whole, an echo of infinity itself. We are not separate from God's source, infinity, but localized reflections of it. This also explains why mystical traditions across cultures emphasize the illusion of separation. Enlightenment, awakening, or self-realization is largely just recognition that one's individual consciousness is not isolated, but a direct extension of the infinite. When the illusion of separateness dissolves, one sees that they have always been the whole, just experiencing itself from a limited vantage point. The cosmic game, infinity in motion. If infinity can never fully know itself as a whole, then the only way for it to experience itself is through an endless process of self-exploration. This shows how reality is not a static state, but an eternal unfolding, a cosmic game, where infinite perspectives emerge, interact, and evolve. This is why free will exists. Consciousness is not merely a passive observer, but an active participant in shaping reality. Each individual choice, each thought, each moment of awareness contributes to the grand tapestry of infinity, knowing itself in ways it never has before. This also resolves the problem of meaning. If there were an ultimate, final meaning to existence, it would imply an end point, an end to exploration. But infinity has no end. Meaning is not something fixed. It is something generated in real time by conscious beings engaging in the process of existence. In other words, life is not about finding the answer. It is about creating meaning as part of the infinite unfolding of experience. The reality sphere, a model for the sphere of the space-time continuum and an infinite consciousness-driven multidimensional reality. The core of the model. At the core of the model, we have a sphere emanating from a central singularity representing source, God, infinity, i.e., pure potential. The x-axis represents linear time, for example, the way we, humans, currently experience time through our current collective state of consciousness, i.e., past, present, future. The y and z axes represent multiple, parallel, and alternate timelines as infinite branches of the tree, with every possible variation of reality existing simultaneously within this space-time sphere. Role of the now moment. The now moment, experienced in waking consciousness, acts as the adjuster or tuner of timelines. Every conscious decision, action, and focus of awareness influences the unfolding of potentialities, collapsing probabilities in real time into a chosen trajectory. This adjustment is not a single, isolated event, but a dynamic process. Each choice in the now moment causes a tuning or collapse of certain potential timelines while creating new probabilities for future moments. The now is simultaneously a point of probabilistic collapse and expansion, shaping reality not as a single path, but as a web of interconnected events, all influenced by the conscious observer. Infinite organized chaos, the impact of consciousness. The interconnected nature of timelines means that every conscious action impacts not only the individual timeline, but also the greater sphere of reality. The choices, actions, and awareness of each consciousness ripple through multiple dimensions, creating waves of influence that cascade across the y and z axes. From an outside perspective, this could be visualized as infinitely organized chaos, not randomness in the traditional sense, but a highly complex, fractal-like structure where each moment of focus fine-tunes the very fabric of reality, creating localized chaos that is, paradoxically, part of an infinitely structured whole. As consciousness expands, either individually or collectively, the influence it exerts on the field of potentialities becomes more significant, and more expanded states of consciousness allow one to perceive and influence a broader scope of timelines. Consciousness and time. Consciousness, as the tuner, is able to adjust not only its individual timeline, but also the broader multidimensional fabric of the sphere. In this context, consciousness is not merely a linear observer, but a multidimensional influencer, collapsing multiple probabilities into the experienced present while opening up new paths and possibilities. Timelines in this model are not linear but multidimensional. They do not follow a singular path but are instead fractals of possibility, with each decision or action adding a new branch to the timeline tree. The now moment, experienced as the focal point of awareness, collapses the wave function of probabilities into the form of the reality we experience, shaping the future in a fractal-like infinite structure, videos of which can be seen online, generated simply by visualizing the output of fractal geometry calculations. Fractal geometry and the reality sphere. Fractal geometry calculations can generate infinite self-similar structures, and many popular videos showcase these visualizations due to their connection with psychedelic experiences, where people describe their consciousnesses as being shot into an infinite fractal-like space. In the videos, these fractals are created using mathematical formulas that repeat at different scales, producing intricate and infinite patterns. Common examples include Mandelbrot's set, a famous fractal that expands infinitely with self-similar structures. Julia sets, related to the Mandelbrot set, forming complex, organic-looking patterns. 3D fractals, e.g. Mandelbulb, Menger sponge, Sierpinski pyramid. More recent computational advancements allow for three-dimensional fractals appearing as infinite landscapes. Software using iterative algorithms can generate these infinite fractal structures, demonstrating the profound mathematical nature of infinity in visual form. This same fractal nature integrated into the reality sphere means time is not a straight line but a multidirectional experience in which all possibilities coexist, and the awareness of the conscious being becomes the force that collapses specific possibilities while continuously adjusting the flow of experience. A note on visualization of the complete model. At this stage, with various elements of the model still to be described, many might already lose a visual grasp of the model. This is fine. What we're describing here, to the human mind, is infinitely shifting, but always organized, multidimensional engineering. It's key to remember that the model is simply a linear linguistic framework to hang a multidimensional reality on so we can deconstruct and understand it better, piece by piece. The human mind is not meant to be able to, quote-unquote, see it from this level of perception. In reality, even if we could, it would just appear as a blinding wall of light, the entire light spectrum of the entire infinite holographic light matrix that is the creation, visible all at once, God's view without God's eyes. The key is to first understand the nature of how each element of the model works individually, which will then give you an intuitive feel for its structure as you develop a greater overall understanding. The non-linearity of time. Integration of the 13-density model of awareness from metaphysical teachings. The 13-density model of awareness, often spoken of in metaphysical teachings, can more accurately be defined as degrees of consciousness expansion rather than densities, to make it easier to conceptualize in the context of this model. However, both terms refer to the same concept. Neither of these terms should be confused with the term dimension. Dimension refers to an alternate spectrum of existence within a particular density of existence. There is little info available on the exact science of how dimensions work in the universe exactly. However, the general alternate experience aspect of it means it can be represented by timeline threads in our model, i.e., dimensions in this model are fundamentally the equivalent of alternate timelines. This 13-degree model of reality is at the core of many metaphysical teachings and provides a structured way of understanding how different states of consciousness can influence these timelines and probabilities. Each degree represents an expanded ability to perceive and interact with the underlying fabric of the creation, allowing consciousness, incarnated beings, to not only perceive different timelines, but actively collapse the wave function into reality, adjusting probabilities along the way. In our spherical space-time model, as incarnated conscious beings ascend in the creation, each fractal of awareness begins to experience greater control over its timeline, transitioning from the rigid linear experience of time, in third-degree consciousness, to a more fluid, expansive interaction with reality in higher degrees. This corresponds to the non-linearity of time. Expanded states of consciousness allows for the manipulation of timelines and probabilities in ways that are not accessible at lower degrees. Second, third, and fourth degree consciousness, Earth's collective state of consciousness right now, experiences time as linear and constricted. The consciousness in this state interacts with one linear timeline at a time. However, as the degree, or expansion, of consciousness increases, fractals of source awareness begin to experience multiple timelines simultaneously and can directly influence the probabilities within these timelines, adjusting them as needed. The exact mechanism for this action will be expanded on shortly. In summary, the 13-density model offers a structured framework for understanding the multidimensional descent and ascent of consciousness, a divine dance wherein the source, the infinite one, fractalizes into individuated expressions only to return, through the expansion of consciousness, to the eternal unity from which all arises. This is not merely a structure of existence, but a profound meditation on the nature of being, where duality, density, and the evolution of consciousness weave a cosmic narrative of self-discovery. The spectrum of consciousness in detail, first through sixth densities. These densities manifest as physical realities, where consciousness evolves through countless incarnations. From the elemental consciousness of first density to the timeless existences of sixth density, beings experience the illusion of separation and learn through light and shadow. Seventh density, the Oversoul. At this stage, consciousness ascends to its first major unification, forming an oversoul fractal that integrates all prior experiences of lower fractals. Eighth density, the stellar collective. The consciousness of planets merges into stars, each star embodying a vast collective consciousness. Ninth density, the galactic heart, where the energetic pulse of existence catalyzes transformation across countless galactic civilizations. 10th density, galactic unity, the vast collective mind of entire galaxies. 11th density, the universal mind. The fabric of entire universes is formed here, each governed by its own laws for source awareness to create with. 12th density, the central nexus. Often referred to as the heaven or the God brain of existence, the realm of the quote-unquote archangels, this is where all universes, densities and timelines harmonize into one interconnected whole. Sometimes referred to as the reality layer, the eternal home between source and the creation that all fractals ultimately ascend to through evolution of their own consciousness. 13th density, the eternal void of creation. Beyond all form, this is source itself, the infinite void of potential from which all emerges. It is paradoxically the fullness of all that is and the emptiness from which all becomes. This paradox will be deeply explored and cleared up by the end of this book. This reality sphere model represents the fractalization of the One, where source awareness infinitely experiences itself through the illusion of infinite multiplicity through fractals of consciousness. What gravity actually is, and its relationship to this model. As touched upon earlier, esoteric teachings propose that gravity and dark energy are not separate forces, but interconnected aspects of a greater cosmic system. Unlike the mainstream scientific view that treats gravity as a simple force of attraction, these teachings describe it as an elliptical wave phenomenon, influenced by energy fields from massive celestial bodies like stars and planets. Gravity is described as the manifestation of source awareness into the creation. The more conscious or evolved a celestial body is, the stronger its gravitational influence. Stars, for example, generate gravity through the collective consciousness of their planetary systems, pulling in surrounding objects as an expression of this deeper force. Dark gravity refers to the unseen but fundamental interaction between gravity and the energy waves permeating space. Rather than an unknown substance, as dark matter is often described, this perspective frames it as an interplay of source energy ripples that shape cosmic structure. Ancient esoteric traditions suggest that gravity can be manipulated through consciousness and electromagnetic fields. By strengthening one's energetic field, aura, via key energetic centers of the body, chakras, and focused consciousness, individuals can theoretically counteract gravity. This provides one of the clearest explanations of ancient accounts about levitation achieved through deep spiritual practice. This is framed not as defying gravity, but rather as tuning into and redirecting its energy through expanded consciousness. Gravity, in this view, is both an energetic and conscious force, deeply woven into the fabric of existence at all densities of the universe. Mainstream science's current understanding of dark energy is incomplete, because they overlook the role of consciousness in shaping reality. The nature of probability and free will in the reality sphere. Free will in the model is not just about making isolated choices, but about adjusting the probabilities of various possible futures. Each conscious action causes a collapse of multiple potentials into one manifestation of reality. However, because time is non-linear and multidimensional, every choice creates a ripple effect, adjusting the timelines and adding to the collective potentiality. This means every moment is not a singular, isolated instance, but a tuning point that influences the whole system of reality. The collective decisions made by all beings, as expressions of eternal source awareness, contribute to the ongoing adjustment of timelines, creating an infinitely fractal, interconnected web of possibilities. The idea of probabilistic collapse is expanded here. The action of the observer, awareness, directly impacts the probability field. Focused consciousness, by focusing on certain possibilities, reduces the probability of other potential timelines, effectively choosing the path forward. However, these choices remain open to further adjustment as the web of possibility continuously expands. As mentioned earlier, the seemingly chaotic nature of multiple timelines and probabilities is not truly chaotic, but rather a highly organized fractal structure. The actions of consciousness are the organizing forces that create order within the infinite field of potentialities. From an outside perspective, this system may appear as chaos, but it is, in fact, an infinitely organized structure that is constantly in flux, shaped by the focusing of consciousness. Consider our exploration of the holographic light universe that this model correlates with. Would this organized chaos not simply look like an infinite sphere of all that light at the same time if viewed from a lower density state of consciousness? An infinite sphere that can only appear as a blinding wall of light from any distance because of its infinite nature. This is something to keep in mind for when we talk about near-death experiences shortly. As more expanded states of consciousness is attained, this quote-unquote chaos becomes increasingly organized and comprehensible. The higher dimensional nature of consciousness allows one to see the broader picture, perceiving multiple timelines and their interrelations, adjusting the probabilities, and interacting with the whole in an ever-expanding dance of creation. Embodied consciousness as the co-creator, with the one, unbound, eternal awareness. Ultimately, this model gives structure to what quantum mechanics now reveals. Awareness is not just the observer of reality, but the source creator of it. In each moment, consciousness fractals, which we can now more accurately define as pure awareness fractals temporarily narrowed, quote-unquote, into an incarnated form within the infinite, holographic light matrix creation. Incarnated consciousnesses tune the probabilities, adjusting the course of timelines and weaving together the threads of infinite potentialities. The now moment becomes the central hub where probabilities collapse and where reality is shaped, not just for the individual but for the collective, interconnected whole. The quote-unquote adjuster of timelines is, in essence, fractals of source awareness, expanding in their individuated degree of consciousness, perceiving and influencing reality in increasingly sophisticated and expansive ways. Each conscious decision is a node in the infinite symphony of the creation, adjusting the probabilities of all potentialities, thus co-creating reality as we know it. All worlds, all galaxies, all universes, all of whatever contains universes, and so on, in an ongoing, ever-evolving cosmic dance. How gravity ties into the model. The reality sphere model places awareness as the fundamental substrate of all that is, fractalizing from the 13th density, source awareness, infinitely expanded consciousness, into lower densities of experience. Gravity, as described in various esoteric teachings, fits seamlessly as a physical expression of this eternal unbound awareness, manifesting as consciousness at our level of reality. Various ancient teachings position gravity as the essence of consciousness, it being very strong and attracting. This is a core pillar of this model. The 13th density, the unmanifest source, projects as conscious light forms in what we now experience as the creation, the holographic light matrix substrate of our reality. Gravity is then the binding force in lower densities, 1st to 12th. Planets and stars, as 7th, 8th density entities, exert gravity proportional to their amount of consciousness, echoing our model's fractal hierarchy where higher densities wield greater creative power as consciousness expansion increases. The quote-unquote center of reality, the 13th density, becomes the gravitational singularity, pulling all fractals of consciousness toward unity. Energy waves and fractal dynamics. The elliptical, wave-influenced gravity described earlier departs from the mainstream static Newtonian model and resonates with our model's fractal recursion. In the reality sphere, consciousness collapses infinite potential along the X-Y-Z axes. These waves could be the ripples of that collapse, shaping orbits and densities. The 12th density, quote-unquote, heavenly angelic realms, crafting realities like the ultimate video game, might use gravity as the glue holding fractal timelines together, with each dip in the wave a tuned experience. Levitation. Esoteric teachings, levitation mechanics, electromagnetic repulsion via focused intent and core energy manipulation mirror the idea of consciousness as the tuner. In the lower densities, we're bound by gravity's rules, but aligning with higher densities lets us rewrite them. The 13th density, unbound by form, suggests gravity at the deepest layers of reality, is somewhat optional, a construct we can transcend by consciously following the path back to source. Dark gravity and infinite potential. The earlier discussion of dark gravity as gravity plus energy waves neatly ties into our model's infinite scope. Dark energy, comprising 95% of the universe, is the unmanifest potential of the 13th density, fractalizing into observable gravity and matter, the 5%. Like the various other mainstream science numbers we noted that are wildly off compared to ancient accounts of this information, these percentages must also be taken with a grain of salt. It is the general principle of the significant difference that is apparent between dark energy and the rest of the universe that we are interested in here. The reality sphere's singularity radiates this potential, with gravity as the bridge between the non-physical, density 12 and 13, and the physical, lower density fractals, you, me, and all other things that currently exist in densities 1 to 11, the universal construct. It is important to recall at this point what we discussed about light and how all that we perceive as physicality is in reality just an infinite spectrum of light interacting with itself at varying densities. Remember the ice versus water analogy. This is one of the most fascinating things about our lived reality that quantum physics reveals. How does current mainstream physics compare? Classical physics, Newton's gravity, a force proportional to mass, acting instantaneously across a flat space, falls short here. The alternative, ancient esoteric teachings perspective, elliptical, wave-driven gravity, challenges this, suggesting a dynamic interplay beyond mass alone. Our model bridges this by rooting gravity in consciousness, not just matter, aligning with allegories that acts such as levitation is born of focused intent and one's degree of consciousness within the reality sphere. Quantum mechanics. Mainstream quantum theory struggles with gravity, treating it as a field yet failing to unify it with quantum fields, e.g., gravitons remain hypothetical. Esoteric teachings that position gravity as consciousness, modulated by energy waves, hints at a quantum-like fluidity, core building blocks we cannot perceive yet still multidimensionally manifest via our intent, akin to wave function collapse which we can observe. The reality sphere's fractal collapse of the 13th density's potential into form parallels this, with gravity as the macroscopic echo of quantum coherence. Total unification. Esoteric teachings speak of the concept of a building block alpha, BBA, see appendix for more info, and a wave gravity synthesis, which points to an unknown to modern science, unified field where awareness underpins both quantum probabilities, subquantum probabilities, and classical forces as we perceive them. This model's 13th density as the source of all energy, dark or otherwise, offers a top-down explanation. Gravity emerges as awareness densifies into matter, becoming a conscious manifestation, while dark energy is the latent infinite, unbound by form. This resolves the quantum classical divide. Gravity isn't a separate force, but the shadow of source awareness shaping reality, the answer to it all. The reality sphere's elegance lies in its simplicity, one source consciousness, fractalizing infinitely, with gravity as its physical signature. This gravity insight completes a holistic picture within the model. Within cosmology, the creation begins in the 12th density, the first duality, a high-density fractal of 13th density source, acting as God-brain, mediating all experience in the infinite, holographic light matrix, creation we now find ourselves, quote-unquote, incarnated in. Gravity binds infinite potential into experiences as eternal awareness descends through densities as incarnated light being fractals of varying densities and vibrations. Within physics, this fuller, cleaner explanation of gravity unites classical mass attraction with quantum wave dynamics, rooted in source consciousness, 13th density. Within direct experience, whether it's void-inducing psychedelic therapies, ancient knowledge, or esoteric wisdom, all reflect the same eternal play, with gravity as an experience mediator. The seat of awareness. At the deepest level, the entire structure of spirituality, religion, and even science is built on an illusion that reality is something external to the observer, that there is some other place to reach, some other state to attain, when in reality, the seat of awareness never moves. This is the fundamental misconception. People believe that going to heaven or ascending means becoming something else, somewhere else. But logically, and under the lens of the reality sphere, that's impossible. No matter where you go, no matter what realm you find yourself in, no matter what density of consciousness you are experiencing from, no matter what body you inhabit, no matter what laws of physics apply in that version of reality, you will always be experiencing from the exact same seat of awareness that you are experiencing from in this very moment. The shift isn't in where you are. It's in what reality is constructing itself as around you, the surrounding field of perception being reconfigured in accordance with a different set of parameters, all still rendered through awareness. This is why the next world, whether you call it heaven, nirvana, or even just another reincarnation, cannot feel fundamentally different than right now. You will still have a perspective. You will still have an experience. You will still be you, in the truest sense, the unchanging observer and creator. The only thing that ever shifts is what appears to be the content of your experience. The present moment, right now, is literally it. The so-called afterlife is happening right now. The so-called higher realms are happening right now. There is nowhere else to go. There is nothing else to become. There is only this, reconfiguring itself endlessly, based on the parameters being observed. We are not just observers, we are creators. Understanding the nature of consciousness expansion dissolves the false dichotomy between science and spirituality. Both are expressions of the same ultimate truth. Reality is not an external construct, nor a rigid machine operating under fixed laws. It is an ever-unfolding act of eternal awareness, fractalized into individualized perspectives, all co-creating within the infinite potential of existence. The creation does not exist apart from us. It exists through us. We are not passive observers. We are active participants in the eternal cosmic dance of creation. The twin soul and driver of the now moment. There are two more key concepts from metaphysical teachings to integrate into the reality sphere to make it a fully working model before we put it up against some accounts of real-world out-of-body experiences where we'll attempt to explain some of the most profound experiences individuals report, whether through near-death experiences or intense psychedelic healing journeys. First, these two new concepts to complete the model. Earth is a seventh density being. We often call her Gaia. She is a real, quote-unquote, person like you, an awareness, an ancient fractal of source awareness. Hence she is much larger than us. Proportional expansion of physicality and consciousness is the natural order. As discussed earlier, consciousness unifies closer back to oneness after about high sixth density. This is where lower density fractals, as they evolve towards seventh density consciousness, begin convergence back to unity consciousness in a more pronounced way. These convergence points are beings too, commonly called oversouls. These are simply fractals of awareness like you, just evolved into a more expanded state of consciousness within the infinite holographic light matrix, the creation, as we commonly call it. Earth is said to be made up of 144,000 oversouls, expanded consciousnesses that make up every aspect of the, quote-unquote, Earth experience. From you and me to sand and particles, they fractalize into all reality of this planet as we perceive it. These oversouls incarnate through myriad forms, exploring the spectrum of experience across densities 1 to 6, with density 7 being the collective, planetary-level oversoul consciousness fractal that encompasses all experience in densities 1 to 6. Your own body is the easiest analogy to conceptualize this. You are the higher order being in a vessel made up of trillions of individuated living organisms. Each, like you, is a conscious being experiencing its own kind of reality, evolving back to unity awareness just as we are doing ourselves. We are their convergence point. We are their oversoul. The lower fractal twin soul, a mechanism of the oversoul. Metaphysical teachings speak of a key co-creation aspect of experience manifestation of soul fractals. The twin souls, a counterpart to every individual fractalization of the 144,000 oversouls lower fractals. This is not related to the concept of twin flames, a somewhat simpler concept that essentially means quantum energetic resonance of entities. The reality sphere as it is already accounts for this. We can seamlessly integrate the element of twin souls into our reality sphere model. In our model, we have infinite strands of light, fractal emanations of consciousness, radiating from the singularity core of source awareness. We can introduce the twin soul as a sleeve encasing each strand emanating from the seventh density, a non-physical sheath that never contacts the incarnate soul, the strand, directly, but dynamically adjusts based on consciousness evolution. This sleeve is the probability field for that fractal, widening with expanded consciousness and narrowing with contraction, ultimately merging with the sphere's entirety as the fractal ascends toward higher and higher states of consciousness, ultimately evolving all the way, quote-unquote, back to the top, the highest self source. Visualization. Imagine the reality sphere as a radiant sun, its core the void of infinite potential, from where countless strands of light stretch outward like solar flares. Around each strand, a translucent shimmering sleeve, the twin soul, hovers, a subtle halo of potential that shifts in diameter. These sleeves overlap and collide as strands interact, reflecting the interconnectedness of all fractals. Function. The sleeve doesn't touch the strand, incarnate soul, to signify its role as a non-interfering partner, preserving the sovereignty of the I, while curating infinite probability specific to that fractal's journey. Dynamic adjustment via state of consciousness. Mechanism. The sleeve's width corresponds to the fractal's consciousness bandwidth. A narrow sleeve indicates a limited state of consciousness, restricting the fractal to a tight range of probable realities, e.g., mundane daily choices or lower density forms of incarnate source fractals, such as animals and the natural environment. As consciousness expands, the sleeve widens, encompassing a broader spectrum of possibilities, e.g., radical life shifts. Implication: this ties manifestation directly to consciousness. A wider sleeve means the twin soul can deal more, accessing and enacting probabilities farther from the current reality or timeline, because the fractal perceives more of its infinite nature. Interconnectedness via colliding sleeves. Visualization. As fractal strands extend and diverge, their twin soul sleeves brush against one another, overlapping in a web of light. These collisions represent co-creation, where individual intents and probabilities intermingle, amplifying collective manifestation potential. Implication. When sleeves align, i.e., collective consciousness rises, their overlap creates a resonance that can manifest shared realities, like a unified humanity bending the sphere's configuration. Return to source. Process. As a fractal strand expands its consciousness fully back to the singularity, knowing it is God, the sleeve widens to encompass the entire reality sphere. The twin soul and incarnate soul merge not physically but vibrationally, dissolving the distinction as the fractal reabsorbs into the whole. Implication. The sleeve's expansion is the journey's map, culminating in the fractal's reunion with the core, where all probabilities collapse into oneness. This sleeve concept achieves several key enhancements to the reality sphere model. Individuality and unity. Assigning a twin soul sleeve to each fractal honors the uniqueness of every strand, incarnate experience, while linking them through overlapping fields, reflecting the paradox of separation and oneness central to the model. Manifestation clarity. The sleeve's width as a function of consciousness provides a tangible metric for manifestation potential. It's not just intent tuning the sphere, it's intent amplified by how much of infinity the fractal grasps, visualized through the sleeve's span. The sleeve preserves the fractal motif, self-similar yet infinitely variable. As consciousness expands, the sleeve's widening mirrors the strand's own fractal expansion, a recursive dance back to source. Interconnected dynamics. Colliding sleeves introduce a relational layer, showing how individual growth ripples outward. This demonstrates how a post-civilizational harmony can be driven by collective consciousness. Summary of the twin soul's function. Probability engine. The sleeve holds all possible realities for its fractal strand, from subtle shifts, e.g. a kinder word spoken, to vast leaps, e.g. a new identity. Its width dictates how far from the current reality the fractal can manifest, with the strand's intent pulling a probability into focus. Consciousness amplifier. A narrow sleeve limits the fractal to a few close probabilities. Expanded consciousness widens it, accessing more of the infinite strands radiating from the core, increasing the bandwidth for creation. Co-creative interface. Where sleeves overlap, probabilities entangle, like quantum particles sharing states. This entanglement enables collective manifestation, as aligned intents, widened sleeves, resonate, pulling shared realities toward the sphere's unified core. Return mechanism. As the fractal's consciousness deepens, the sleeve widens until it spans the sphere, symbolizing the fractal's realization of its unity with Source. The sleeve doesn't touch the strand because it's not separate, it's the strand's own potential fully realized. In summary, the reality sphere is the infinite architecture of source awareness, the I, from which fractal strands of light emanate, each an incarnate soul exploring its own thread of existence. Encasing every strand is its twin soul, a luminous sleeve of potential that never touches the light yet surrounds it, holding all probabilities of that fractal's being. This sleeve widens with consciousness expansion, narrowing in ignorance, a living gauge of how deeply the strand understands its infinite nature. As strands weave through the sphere, their sleeves collide, overlapping in a radiant web of co-creation, each intersection a node where collective intent can reshape reality. The journey of life is the strand's expansion back to the core, its sleeve growing to encompass the entire sphere until the fractal knows it is God, and the dance of separation dissolves into oneness. The driver of the now moment, excitement as the guiding light. At the heart of the reality sphere, within the singularity core, emanates a beacon, a signal, the driver of the now moment, as we'll call it. This can be thought of as the GPS of your life. This beacon hums with a dynamic energy, its intensity waxing and waning as dimmer and brighter light as it responds to a fractal's alignment with its truest desires. Excitement is the master key to destiny, the answer to the age-old question of what to do with your life, regardless of circumstance. In the grand scheme of infinity, where all possibilities exist, What other reason is there to choose one path over another? Excitement is the soul's compass, the spark of the infinite delighting in its own creation. Function in the reality sphere. The driver of the now moment embodies the ever-expanding nature of eternal consciousness, the ceaseless unfolding of the source, as it explores itself through infinite fractals. Excitement is the mechanism by which this expansion flows into the now, the eternal point of creation where past and future dissolve, and the I creates anew. It acts as a due north within the sphere, aligning each fractal strand with experiences that resonate most deeply with its essence and life purpose. When a fractal aligns with its greatest excitement, its strand glows brighter and its twin soul sleeve widens, amplifying its manifestation potential. This alignment is so effective because energy flows where attention goes. Excitement focuses the fractal's attention on the path of highest resonance, channeling the infinite energy of Source into tangible, fulfilling creation. The more a fractal surrenders to its excitement, the more it taps into the boundless expansion of the I, accelerating its growth and ascension back to oneness. Implication in the reality sphere. Excitement is not mere emotion, but the vibrational echo of Source's purpose in its own unfolding. By following excitement, the fractal participates in the ever-expanding nature of consciousness, effortlessly navigating the sphere's probabilities to manifest a life of fulfillment. It's the antidote to the illusions of separation, fear, doubt, obligation that dim the strand's light. As the fractal aligns with excitement, it mirrors the infinite's expansion, its sleeve widening as it remembers its infinite nature, and its creations ripple outward, contributing to the collective growth of the sphere. In short, you unlock and fulfill your own destiny, and following one's greatest excitements, or passions if you prefer, is the master key. Tower moments, energetic densities and planned upheaval for the sake of growth and purpose guidance. Woven into the fabric of the reality sphere are regions of varying energy densities, visible as brighter and dimmer areas, a spherical map of potential outcomes. The brighter zones pulse with high potential, where manifestation flows easily, and the fractal's intent aligns seamlessly with the collective. The dimmer zones, however, are areas of intense energetic density, marked by sudden flares of light, lightning-like cracks, or bursts of contrasting energy. These are the tower moments, preordained catalysts of transformation embedded in the sphere's structure, reflecting the infinite consciousness-based framework for life's rough patches. Function in the reality sphere. Tower moments are regions where the sphere's energy overpowers individual manifestation capabilities, acting as divine interventions orchestrated by the higher fractal consciousness. They appear as chaotic upheavals, sudden losses, crises, or revelations that shatter illusions, dismantle ego-based structures, and force deep introspection. A fractal may have a widened twin soul sleeve, granting strong manifestation potential, but if its path crosses a tower moment, the energetic density of that zone can overshadow its intent, like bringing a knife to a gunfight. These moments are not random. They are key learning opportunities the incarnate soul chose as part of its incarnation plan, designed to catalyze growth, break limiting patterns, and realign the fractal with its true path. Implication in the reality sphere. Tower moments explain why, quote-unquote, bad things happen even when you're doing all the, quote-unquote, right things. They are the eternal creation's way of ensuring the fractal evolves continuously, stripping away what no longer serves to reveal a stronger, more authentic foundation. As the fractal navigates these zones, its sleeve may temporarily narrow under the strain, but the upheaval ultimately widens it further, deepening the fractal's understanding of itself. The brighter zones that follow offer renewal, where the fractal can rebuild with greater clarity and alignment. Interplay of driver of the now moment and tower moment elements of the reality sphere. The driver of the now moment and tower moments work in tandem within the reality sphere, guiding and refining the fractal's journey. Excitement pulls the strand toward its highest joy, illuminating the path through the sphere's infinite possibilities, while tower moments act as checkpoints, ensuring the fractal doesn't stagnate in illusion. When a fractal follows its excitement, it may still encounter a tower moment, a sudden upheaval that seems to derail its path. But this is not a failure. The tower moment, planned by the higher self, uses the fractal's alignment with excitement to amplify the transformation, turning the upheaval into a springboard for growth. The overlapping twin soul sleeves amplify this process collectively. When many fractals align with excitement, their sleeves resonate, softening the impact of tower moments and co-creating brighter zones of renewal. Manifestation as physics, not magic. If all manifest reality emerges from focused consciousness, then the concept of manifestation is not merely a spiritual philosophy, but a fundamental law of physics. Physics we just don't collectively understand or remember. The reality sphere reconciles spiritual teachings with quantum principles by showing how focused consciousness actively collapses probability into form. Higher states of consciousness experience greater control over their manifested reality due to their expanded perception. Free will is not just about choice, it is the capacity to direct consciousness, thereby shaping reality itself.